maintaining your spiritual life in ministry, when you haven't got lots of people around you in our context. And I want to just begin really by emphasizing what I think is the importance of that, not just for our own personal spiritual vitality, but for the ministry we're doing. And I'm going to quote from Eugene Peterson in a moment. And I'm going to do that partly because I think it's a great quote and really helpful. But also it just gives me the opportunity to say, I found his writings really helpful. Now, I don't know if others have read him, and I don't think everybody gets on with him. He can be quite opaque. I think there's about sort of 1 in 5 pages. I think I just don't know what you're talking about. He's not as conservative as probably many of us would be. He calls himself Orthodox evangelical, but he'll quote liberals and Roman Catholics, and he's got some surprising omissions. He has almost nothing about evangelism. But having said that, he's got a vision for ministry, which I have found is kind of deeply affirming for the kind of revitalisation ministry I've found myself in and trying to do. And I think he's really helpful for affirming us in that, and really because it's one of his big things is, look, ministry is very ordinary. It's just very mundane, and things we think are not important actually are incredibly important, and that's what we've got to give ourselves to. And he's very helpful, I think, on the spiritual life needed for that ministry. So anyway, in this book, Working the Angles, he begins the book, written in 1987, with this striking paragraph. American pastors are abandoning their posts left and right, and at an alarming rate. They're not leaving their churches and getting other jobs. Congregations still pay their salaries. Their names remain on the church stationery. They continue to appear in pulpits on Sundays, but they're abandoning their posts, their calling. And his thesis is that many pastors have become what he calls shopkeepers. And he says that they've got the concerns of the shopkeeper. Keep your customer happy, persuade them to part with as much money as possible, lure customers away from the other shop down the road. And he says some of them are very good shopkeepers, and they've got very big buildings and very big congregations and very impressive reputations. And he says, what's more, people in the church want us to be shopkeepers. They want nice, uplifting sermons. They want good programs, efficient administration, a successful church, and so on. So there's pressure to be a shopkeeper rather than a pastor. And therefore, we need a routine and a discipline that is going to strengthen us to be pastors rather than shopkeepers. And we need a strong spiritual life in order to do that, to pay attention first to God and only second to people, so we minister with integrity. And the metaphor he uses in that book, Working the Angles, is he says if the straight lines of a triangle are the things we do, leading public worship, preaching and so on, the angles are what gives direction to those things that we do. And the angles are the spiritual life that will give integrity and shape to the whole of our ministry. So, and he likens that to the athlete, and those hours and hours of repetitive training which enable the athlete to compete. So I'm just going to mention, following that, 3 practices, very obvious. Well, at least the first one is particularly nothing new, but these are what have sustained me. So I mentioned them. The first is the good old quiet time. I don't know what people call it now, but I remember vividly 1982, Wycliffe, we had a retreat, brilliantly led by Alec Mattia, if you remember him, wonderful Bible teacher, had a lovely kind of soft Irish lilt of a voice. And he came and he exhorted us as ordinands to keep the first hour of the day for the Lord. Not to do preparation, administration, anything else, just for read the scriptures and pray. And that is something that has been very important to me, and I would do that if I were a Christian. But I've always thought if I was getting on a train to go and commute to somewhere to be whatever I was going to be, I might do 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but as a pastor, I'm going to give that hour. And by and large, I've done that and had a practice of following Shane's Bible reading course, reading through the whole of the Bible in a year, New Testament Psalms twice, and then prayer as well as that. And that's been a lifeline. So that's quiet time. Secondly, rejoicing. And this has really come home to me more recently. Paul in 1 Thessalonians 5:16 says, rejoice always. And of course, we're told the joy of the Lord is our strength. What is rejoicing? Well, I define it to myself as a feeling of joy expressed in words. So here's a classic definition from Psalm 9:2. Therefore, my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My heart is glad, a feeling, and my tongue rejoices. I actually say something. So in order to rejoice, I've got to make my heart glad. And George Muller was big on this, the 18th century evangelist and philanthropist from Bristol, 19th century rather, cared for over 10,000 orphans, established 117 schools. And this is what he said. I saw more clearly than ever that the first great and primary business to which I ought to attend every day was to have my soul happy in the Lord. The first thing to be concerned about was not how I might serve the Lord, how I might glorify the Lord, but how I might get my soul into a happy state. Well, how can we do that? Obviously, first thing is, it's the work of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace. Joy is the second aspect of the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5. But we can help, if you like, or walk with the Spirit by reminding ourselves of why we've got reasons to be joyful. Psalm 40:16, may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. So there's the rejoicing. May those who love your salvation say continually, great is the Lord. So we're going to rejoice and be glad when we love God's salvation. So in a way, it's back to that first point, reminding ourselves morning by morning of the wonder of salvation. Personally, I sing every morning, Rejoice the Lord is King. And it's a wonderful survey of the wonder of salvation. When he had purged our stains, he took his seat above. His kingdom cannot fail. This is my favorite line in the whole hymn. The keys of death and hell are to our Jesus given. He sits at God's right hand till all his foes submit. And therefore, lift up your heart, lift up your voice. Rejoice. Again, I say rejoice. So rejoicing. And finally, this might be perhaps the most surprising one, solitude. Luke 5:16, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Note that word often. At the start of his ministry, before he was baptized, he went to the lonely place. He went for rest when he was exhausted. He went to reveal his identity as Messiah. He went when he was grieving the death of John the Baptist. He went just before the cross in Gethsemane. And all of that indicates that solitude was very important to Jesus. And across the centuries, Christians have testified to this. So 15th century, The Imitation of Christ, Thomas à Kempis has a chapter on solitude and silence. Pascal, 17th century, maybe this is a bit exaggerated, but he said, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. 17th century, Matthew Henry, holy souls love seclusion. 20th century, C.S. Lewis, we live, in fact, in a world starved for solitude, silence, and privacy, and therefore starved for meditation and true friendship. And finally, 21st century, Tim Keller was asked a year or two before he died, why do you think young Christian adults struggle most deeply with God as a personal reality in their lives? And he replied, noise and distraction. It's easier to tweet than to pray. And I found periods of solitude immensely helpful. Having a quiet day, I got that from John Stott's book on preaching. And in my first incumbency, having a day every Tuesday, going to a friend's house just setting aside the day, no phone, emails, all that sort of thing. I found that tremendously helpful. Some kind of study break or retreat. There was a wonderful place it was first of all called St. Julian's near Billingshurst. Then they changed it to St. Cuthman's. Now, sadly, it's closed. But going there 3 or 4 days, Tuesday to Friday often, usually doing some kind of preparation or study, but also time to pray and to think and plan. And actually, for me, walking and solitary walking has been a great blessing. They say, wasn't it? Augustine said, "Solvitur ambulando." It is solved by walking, and I certainly found that sometimes I'm over 4 or 5 days, sometimes just a day, sometimes half a day, but actually just being out. I'm in London, getting out of London, being in the countryside on my own, walking. Lord, what does this passage mean? What are we going to say to people on Sunday? I've got that couple I'm seeing next week about marriage. What should I be doing with them? I'm feeling discouraged at the moment. How can I be encouraged? Just those times I found tremendously helpful. Now I'm conscious that we're all different and different things are going to sustain us, but those are, I think, 3 of my kind of top things. Now I don't know if we do. Are we going to pause there and any questions?
Yeah, if you've got any questions for Mike on that, just whack them in the chat. We'll just chat for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll Mike's then going to talk about using tradition. I mean, Mike, you talk about prayer. I guess for many of us, there'll be things that are on our prayer list that we're changing all the time, but there'll be those things that are stubborn and sit there that are sort of big issues. How do you keep fresh when you sort of got the same things hitting your prayer list day in, day out, the same concerns? How do you keep praying about them in a fresh way and not to sort of, becoming rote in your prayers to the Lord about the sort of same issues that are before you?
I don't know if this is right, but I suppose, there's that little phrase, isn't there? I forget where it comes, where Paul talks about making mention of you in my prayers. And that suggests that he wasn't kind of praying a lot. He wasn't saying many things. He was just mentioning. And I suppose what I've done in practice is just mention them. And I don't think realistically you can go on talking a lot about them, or not every day. If that's what you think about something you pray about every day, maybe dropping them for a time and then bringing them back on. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think I'd have anything else on that.
And it sounds like you're very much starting with just trying to get your heart rejoicing.
Yeah.
Is this the first thing in the morning? Yeah.
Well, that's been the big difference for me, I would say, in the last probably only about 10 years. So I think when I started out as a Christian and in ministry, sort of prayer time would have been almost all intercession.
Yeah.
And I would say in the last 10 years, probably a bit longer than that, but it's been gradually building up that, realizing that in the Psalms, it seems to me that they kind of prepare themselves to pray. I mean, one of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 27. It's about 15 verses, I think. I mean, it's one I've actually managed to learn the whole Psalm. But when you really look at it, out of those 15 verses, the request, teach me your way, Lord. I mean, that's basically the request.
Yeah. And
the rest is, this is why I'm confident. This is what I want to do. This is why I'm feeling a bit unconfident. And sort of, please don't kind of reject me, but that's not exactly a request. But the actual request is, teach me your way, Lord, and it's very brief. And I think that setting our intercession in that context of making our soul happy in the Lord is certainly something that I've developed.
Yeah. And I've got a question about any advice on how to do that when you're struggling with illness or with young children and that kind of thing around the house.
Well, I mean, going back to, this may be completely impractical. I mean, I think on kind of practical arrangements and how you work out I mean, look, if I'll just be honest, I've had quite a kind of old-fashioned, what you might call old-fashioned marriage. So I didn't do a lot of childcare. I'll just be absolutely honest. And that was, for my generation, my parents, that was just normal. More recently, again, going back to walking, you might think I'm obsessed with walking, which I am slightly, but I actually pray as I walk now. And so I get out of the house. And I appreciate if you've got to look after children, you can't do that. But if you can, that's been helpful. I guess otherwise it's a case of, you're married, you've got children, you just got to work it out between you and find some arrangement of sharing that care so that you can find the time and carve it out maybe a bit later in the day. But I'd be really interested to hear if anybody else has got something to say on that, who's had more experience of that.
Someone's asking about whether you've ever tried keeping a prayer diary or anything like that, or journaling, or.
I journal, and I find a journal useful both for kind of working out, sometimes working out my kind of frustrations or thoughts or feelings. I do that rather less now, probably, but I do find it actually really useful at a practical level as I'm, thinking about what am I going to say at the annual meeting. Somebody's died. I can look back, and especially, of course, now I do it on the computer, you can search. It's brilliant for that. And actually just kind of reviewing it at the end of each year and looking at what's happened. So I do that, and I do have a prayer list. Nothing particularly fancy, just on a computer file, and have a daily prayers, weekly, and then I like to pray through the actual roll on a monthly basis.
Great. I've got someone asking to hear more about your singing routine. I'm not sure if that's a serious question, but did you use hymns quite a lot, or?
I do. From my prayer walk, I get to the point where I'm singing "Rejoice, the Lord is King" when I get to Hyde Park. So usually it's kind of fairly empty, and I don't sing too loudly, but I do sing it, and I think there is something about actually, not just saying it in your head, but actually singing it. There is something helpful about doing that. I don't do it a lot more than that, and that's about the only hymn that I do sing at the moment. I've learned other hymns in the past: Rock of Ages, Christ His Glory Fills the Skies. Sometimes listen to more modern music.
Great. And let me ask you one more, then we'll move on to the second bit. And that is, someone's just asking a question related back to the Q&A about the length of stay, and saying, do you think in the current situation we're better off to stay where we are?
I would have thought so. I thought as well. I mean, I just think, the old days, this is what people did, when you go to country churches, and it's, they were there 30, 40, 50 years. And going back to Eugene Pearson, that's a big theme of his. He stayed where he was 28 years, just outside Baltimore. It was a very kind of unglamorous place. And I just think the benefit of the relationships you build up. And I wonder when people say, oh, you ought to move on, whether it's because, there's too much emphasis on you've got to have new programs, and you've got to have fresh ideas, and, not enough on, well, no, basically just do the same thing week after week, pray, preach, love people. And of course, obviously, with the kind of insecurity, it may be if we are orthodox on sexuality, it'll be difficult to go anywhere else. So we'll just have to stay where we are. And I don't think that'll be a bad thing.
Yeah, great. Listen, Mike, you've got to talk to us now about using tradition. So
yeah.
Thank you for that.
Okay, well, rather shorter on this. And I suppose that, and I think this would have been my view, kind of starting out, I would have been pretty suspicious of traditions. And, this is because obviously we read Mark 7, and the Pharisees who love their traditions and therefore deny the word of God. And we've met people, and I've met people, and that they think that, whether you wear robes or not is more important than whether people are saved. And they're selfishly wedded, say, to the Book of Common Prayer. They just don't care that there are people in the parish for whom that's totally culturally alien. And maybe we're influenced by the Western view that things are always getting better. And the new iPhone is always better than the old one. The new car is always safer and bigger and faster. And maybe we kind of buy into this idea that if it's new, it must be better. But I think I'm sure abandoning traditions is not the answer to a bad use of traditions. And I've been very struck by, over many years, Galatians, where, he's arguing about people relying on circumcision and thinking we're justified by being circumcised and obeying and observing other traditions like festival seasons. And then you get this extraordinary line right at the end, chapter 6, when he says, neither is uncircumcision anything. And what I think that means is that, and I think he anticipates that there are people who, I get it. We're not saved by law. We're not saved by keeping the new moon festival. We're not saved by getting circumcised or the food laws. But actually, they start trusting in the opposite of that. And actually start putting their confidence in, I hate circumcision. I hate the seasons. I'm not going to have anything to do with them. And I think we can come to put our trust in anti-tradition things. Open collar rather than dog collar. Calling, having the title senior pastor rather than vicar. Being proud of meeting in a school, not a church. Calling our services meetings rather than services. And actually, we come to put our confidence in those things. And I think that the human heart will fasten on anything other than the cross. And it can fasten on no tradition or no liturgy and so on as much as it can fasten on traditional liturgy. So just getting rid of traditions will not get trust in tradition out of the heart. And the answer is not to get rid of tradition, but to preach the gospel. And this is why I think you see this tremendous freedom in Paul. He had such a grasp of the gospel that he could circumcise Timothy. He could shave his head and take that vow and go to the temple. He could become, as he said, a Jew to the Jews. He could ask the Gentiles not to eat food with blood in it. And Martin Luther discovered the same. And I think because of his strong understanding of justification by faith, and he said, well, look, if it enables you to preach the gospel, well, and I quote, go round in the procession carrying a silver or gold cross, wear a cope or elbow velvet, silk or linen, and if one of these be not enough, then put on 3, typical Luther, as Aaron the high priest did, each one more beautiful than the other. So that's a kind of the background and my tiny bit of my thinking. At St. Simon's, the morning service was very traditional, and Bishop Paul said, I want you to come in, keep the morning service traditional, start something new in the evening, which is what we did. So, that idea of robes, paid choir processing at that point, we don't do that anymore, but they did, is very alien to us. And I remember somebody at Fordham who'd been supportive of this move, but suddenly it was quite difficult because it was about 24 hours before the interview, and he suddenly said, Mike, this is terrible. They do all these things. This is just not us. You shouldn't be going there. And when I first arrived, I very much wondered, should I keep all of that? What should I do with that? And really agonized over that. But I came to think that for the sake of the gospel, in central London particularly, where you've got a large number of conservative Anglican evangelical churches, wouldn't it be sensible to have one, and most of them are, it's guitars, drums, pretty minimal liturgy. I thought, well, why don't we have one where, we can preach the gospel, preach the Bible, but in that context where you will get sort of more culturally conservative people, they feel comfortable there. And, I would say that has borne fruit. And there's a couple I often think of. She's from Finland and from a fairly kind of Pentecostal house church sort of background, married to an Italian, Roman Catholic background. She took him to HDB. She quite liked it, full of life, hands in the air, modern worship, all that. He was completely freaked out by it. So they went to another church, Holy Trinity Sloane Street, liberal Catholic. He sort of felt reasonably comfortable there. She hated it because they weren't preaching the Bible. So they came to St. Simon's. And they've been there ever since, probably about 7 years. And it's been wonderful to see, especially him grow in his understanding of the gospel from that Roman Catholic background in that setting. Or I think of another couple who came just quite recently, and they don't go to an evangelical church, they were visiting, and they said, "Oh yeah, we really enjoyed the service." And somebody else said to them, "Refer to it as an evangelical church." And they said, "Oh no, it's not evangelical. It's not evangelical because it's got robes and music and the organ." And I think I think that's a good thing in the sense that the things they're talking about, the peripherals, and we can actually, as it were, smuggle the gospel in through customs, as it were, under cover of that traditional worship style. Now, there's a price to pay for that. Probably, you get fewer people come than you would otherwise, and certainly evangelicals misunderstand it. I've had quite a few come and go and say, "Oh no, I couldn't get it. It's too high church," which of course it isn't. I mean, it's just what standard evangelical public worship would have been like. But they think, "Oh no, that's if you've got robes and a dog collar and an organ, bad." I also think, I've always liked the Book of Common Prayer, but after using it every week for 13 years, I just think that the spiritual riches in it are incredible, and it would be such a tragedy to lose it. It is the gospel. It's the gospel of justification by faith in liturgical form, and the way it teaches us to pray, to relate to God, to understand holiness, to understand salvation and sin. It's just so robust and rich. I think it's brilliant. Now, I do recognise that what I'm saying is particularly applicable in somewhere like central London. In Fordham, I certainly wouldn't have done this as the main service because it just wouldn't, I think, have been culturally appropriate. But I had a Sunday off, and actually I went to Dedham, where Philip is on the call today, and he wasn't there, but there was a layperson taking the service. I just thought it was great. It was 25, 30 people, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Book of Common Prayer, sung evensong, great talk, 10 to 15 minutes, Bible talk. And I think the only thing I'd want to say is, let's remember that as the evangelistic potential, the mission potential of using maybe literally the Book of Common Prayer, but more traditional worship style, along with, what mostly evangelicals adopt. And I can understand why, with good reason. So nothing particularly revolutionary, but I think they've got potential, those forms. That's it.
Brilliant, Mike. Thank you. Let me just ask you one question. We're going out to breakout rooms in a moment, but was there stuff at St Simon's that was a bridge too far? Or you just actually, I can't do that. And how did you make that decision?
Yeah, so I think there was the they had the Benedictus and the Agnus Dei in the communion service, and I actually phoned up Roger Beckwith. I don't know if people remember him. He used to teach at Wycliffe and liturgical expert. And there was, if it sort of comes before the prayer of consecration, it's heretical, basically. You can have it later and it's kind of more acceptable. So I put my foot down with that. They had, one of the very difficult ones, they had the hymn Valiant Hearts on Remembrance Sunday, which I just thought was terrible. So we had quite a battle over that. And I think that, I was taught that I believe in evolution. I don't believe in revolution. I believe in evolution. But I think it is really good that you come in, in the first year or two, well, probably more than the first year, the first few months, there's something you stop or start, which they don't want, just sort of to kind of demonstrate that you have got oversight. And there are other things as well.
Yeah. And then I just got a technical question. Someone's asking if they can have a reference for the Luther quote.
Yeah, I might be able to find that. I'd have to look that up.
Great. Well, look, I think it is it's about 2:10. So unless anyone's got any other